Welcome to A Growing Concern. As you can see behind us there, a coal yard. We're going to talk about coal for maybe the first half an hour. We're going to probably talk about other forms of unsustainable energy as well. I have my guest, Ted Gleichman, who is with the Oregon Sierra Club. Ted was on a while back talking more specifically about LNG, but you got coal, gas, oil, LNG, all these terrible things where we just want to keep digging. We're in a hole. We want to keep digging. We don't want to we meaning the people that run the media and run our government. But we'll maybe touch on that too in a while. But anyway, welcome to the show, Ted.
Pleasure to be here, Jim. Thank you.
All right. I know you opened my eyes about a lot of issues that I've covered this LNG, when Dan Sears was on and different over the years, and I had a pretty good handle on it. But there's a lot of substrata of that issue that I didn't really understand. And what prompted me to invite Ted was the announcement that I received from a score of people about it's framed as a victory, but you never win this battle. I mean, you never win the war anyway. You win the battles. And there was a victory as far as a placement of a coal terminal. And I invited Ted on at least talk about that, and then we can expand upon that. So I actually heard something about it on NPR on the way in too. So this is big news apparently.
It is big news. It is a major victory, a major battle in terms of trying to prevent the Pacific Northwest from being the pipeline for exports of coal, oil, and gas to Asia. And this specific one was a decision by the director of the Department of State Lands to deny a permit to a major coal company, Ambre Energy out of Australia, to ship Powder River Basin coal from Wyoming and Montana, first by rail to the port of Morrow.
Well, that's in where, Washington?
No, on the Oregon side, which is why this became a decision for the state of Oregon, and to build a dock there, and then to transfer it from rail to barges and run those barges down the Columbia River. It would have doubled the average barge traffic on the Columbia River. So competing with all the grain barges and other things that are so important to the standard economy of Oregon. And the barges then would have gone to the Port of St. Helens, where the coal would have been offloaded to major ocean-going ships that then would go on down the Columbia, across the Columbia Bar, and to Asia. So what happened is that over a lengthy, complicated evaluation period, the Department of State Lands, which has authority over Oregon waters, Oregon waters are owned by the people of Oregon, not by individuals. So people have rights to use them. There's a lot of legal nuance to that.
So all states aren't that way then?
No, all
right.
states are not that way. Maybe this is part of the legacy of Tom McCall. I don't know. I'm too new.
Tom.
Yeah, I'm too new for that. I know he did the beaches,
Yeah,
so,
that's true.
But and that's not true in most states either. The beaches can be private property in most states too. So, so the Department of State Lands has authority to say who can mess with the waters, who can dredge, who can fill, who can run devices, pipelines across the water, and so on. And there's a series of technical standards that they apply. And so the new head, fairly new head of the Department of State Lands, a woman named Mary Abrams, made what I think is actually a very courageous decision, with a lot of support from the legal team at the Oregon Attorney General's office that represents the state agencies, to deny Ambre Energy a permit to build a fairly small dock, as these things go, to deal with moving this coal off of the trains onto the Columbia barges, and then being able to run it on down and on out to Asia. And it's not a death knell. but it's a major blow. It got national attention, especially in the fossil fuel industry magazines and with the environmental movement, because it is the first time that one of these major fossil fuel projects has had a key permit denied by any government, by either any state government or the federal government. So it's a landmark decision in that way.
I see. Well, there has been some victories along the way with the pipelines and different things that were going on, but a lot of that was the people were just themselves were pulling out because of funding or whatever.
Right,
This
right.
is the first time it has happened like this.
Where it's happened like this, where the applicant. So Bradwood Landing, for example, down on the Columbia,
That's the one I'm thinking
and
of.
the Palomar pipeline is the one you were talking about that was going to run across the slopes of Mount Hood through the Mount Hood National Forest. Those were pulled by the applicants. Bradwood Landing actually went bankrupt officially and left town, leaving $120 million in debts. Including hundreds of thousands not paid to Clatsop County for the work that they'd invested to check into whether or not
They got a foul taste in their mouth from that.
Well, and tough on the taxpayers. You know, these major corporations talk all the time about protecting the taxpayers. Not so much when it's their own goals.
It's protecting the shareholders is what it's about. They didn't do a good job of that either, apparently.
No, I don't think they did.
No.
So this is an important decision, and it's one that we can take a moment to celebrate, and we should. And kudos to Director Abrams at the Department of State Lands, because she applied a lot of moxie and I think some courage to thousands of pages of technical analysis. One of the most interesting things about the press release that she and her department put out in response to this was a statement that jumped out at me, where she said, after reviewing a great deal of information from the applicant and from the public. Now that's the phrase that leaped out at me. Reviewing information from the public. Government taking the public seriously.
And there's boatloads of stuff that came in. I mean,
there were more than 20,000 comments from people.
And also, while I'm thinking about it, I want to thank folks out there, any folks out there that are watching, because there was a lot of public testimony where people went in and had testimony, in person about this. More than one of them. And there was a lot of people that it packed those places, like 400 people, I think, one time.
Got 800 at one of them as well. I mean, it's been a major movement. I mean, the environmental movement, if you stop to think about this for a second, has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on the staff time and the resources, communications, outreach, flyers, and websites, and so on, to try to educate the public with a good deal of effectiveness, I think. I mean, there is, I think, a really broad understanding. And as recently as 2 years ago, the polls were 2-1 in the Pacific Northwest, in Oregon and Washington, that coal terminals, yeah, okay, why not? Now it's just the opposite. It's 2-1 against, as people become more and more aware of the health issues, more and more aware of the risks to the Columbia, to the lands that the trains go through, and as the climate continues to degrade, continues to change, more and more people are aware of those issues as well.
In spite of David and whatever his brother's name, Koch.
Charles
Koch. In spite of all the millions that they're pumping into campaigns, and they own quite a few of our legislators, but in a roundabout way, I think they own quite a bit of our media too. But they're pumping the money, and they're not the only ones. I mean, Ambre, I'm sure, did their share of lobbying with the DSL, Mrs. Abrams or
Ms. I have no idea.
I don't know, but she needs to be commended, and all the folks that went to these rallies and went to these public testimonies took time out of their lives. Good job, and you're doing something with well, I guess you got to have a thick skin, because so much of this stuff gets done, whether we like it or not. And taking time out of their lives to go in there and do something that they know may not do any good at all. and they still did it, and it worked. And it's great that we get these little victories, however small or large they may be, however short-lived or long-lived they may be, to give people a little bit of confidence that we can make a difference.
We can make a difference, and Margaret Mead's old saying, "Never doubt that a small group of dedicated people can change the world," is the only thing that ever has. I know I'm misquoting her, but the theory is right there.
And it's getting a little hackneyed, but the reason it's hackneyed is because it's so right on.
It's clear. It's clear. And its majorities are important. I mean, elections are important. I mean, our senator, junior senator up this year, Jeff Merkley, is one of the leading environmental champions in the U.S. Senate.
And they're sure going after him.
Well, the Koch brothers tossed in $3.6 million, which is chump change for them as billionaires, on behalf of Dr. Monica Webby, who has transformed herself, of course, from pediatric neurosurgeon to Monica the Stalker.
I remember that. That hasn't been brought up yet, but
and of course the Democrats don't have to because the media will.
The media will,
even though the Democrats dug it out originally. So we have a good shot at keeping a really decent U.S. senator in the context of a political structure that has a lot of trouble dealing with these difficult issues, and especially in Oregon. I mean, the flip side to what happened with the Department of State Land's decision that we're celebrating is that Oregon has the weakest environmental laws on the West Coast. Both California and Washington have state NEPA equivalents, the National Environmental Protection Act, under which environmental impact statements are required for major projects. And that has been a key tool for people to actually force the proponents of these projects to lay out the facts, and for a raft of federal and state agencies all over the country, all different kinds of major projects, to really get into the details and to assess whether the applicants are laying out the facts in a complete and accurate way. A lot of lawsuits that have come out of that when that hasn't happened properly. And so the example that applies directly to this coal export situation and this victory in Oregon, there are three major proposals, and this was the smallest of the three, and the only one that was on the Oregon side of our mutual water boundary with Washington State. The other two are in Washington, and together they're more than 10 times as large as this one. The Ambre project proposes to, and it's not wholly dead. They're looking at their possibilities for appeal and other tactics. They got a lot of money. There's a lot of money at stake, but it was not quite 9 million tons a year of coal that would have gone out. Sounds like a lot. It is a lot, but the other two projects, the Longview project just across the river, and the Gateway project in the Puget Sound, are proposed for 41 million tons and 44 million tons respectively. No, I got that wrong. I'm sorry. 44 and 48 million tons, 92 total. And that's a lot of coal.
Are those things on the fast lane, or are they being struggled with?
The interesting thing about this is that because of the legal structure in Washington State being more powerful than our structure in Oregon, which is really an odd duck. Well, the Oregon departments are broken into little fiefdoms, and they all have individual boards that get appointed by the governor. So there's Department of Environmental Quality, Department of State Lands, DLCD, Department of Land Conservation and Development, there's a couple different water groups. So it's really a coalition government rather than a coordinated government. Washington, it's the Department of Ecology, interesting name, that has core responsibility for a whole series of these things that are broken up into different agencies in Oregon, and
Yeah,
leads to people trying to
like
deal with.
Hanford, you know, they're part of the tri-party
Yeah,
agreement.
that's true. And because Washington has SEPA, State Environmental Protection Act, the governor, Jay Inslee, who when he was in Congress was one of the leading voices of concern about climate and environmental issues, was able to mandate to that department that they shall examine the climate impacts of these two major coal export projects still proposed for the state of Washington. And the same thing applies to the big oil terminal that's proposed for the Port of Vancouver by Tesoro Savage, an interesting name.
Their gas stations are around.
There
Tesoro,
are.
yeah.
Yeah, and they're a nasty oil company. I mean, they want to take oil out of the Bakken and in North Dakota, the major new field in North Dakota, and ship it by train to the Port of Vancouver, where it would go on to oil tankers and then on up. And this is a company that tried to get California's renewable energy statute overturned by the people of the state by putting up a corporate initiative on the ballot, funded by corporate initiative. Now California, the voters of California rejected Tesoro Savage in their Tesoro Corporation in their attempt to eliminate renewable energy progress there. So they showed wisdom on that. But this new operation for the Port of Vancouver, again, just right across the river by Tesoro Savage. I saw a quick interview with Governor Inslee, and he was asked how this is going to happen, and he did it the way that a responsible elected official has to do it. He said, well, this is going into a permitting process and it'll be fully reviewed. And, well, are you for it or against it, Governor? No, this is going into a permitting process and it'll be fully reviewed. Right, exactly.
That's good.
And do you think it's a good idea? Do you think it'll succeed or fail? It's going into a permitting process and it'll be so frustrated. Exactly. But he's a politician who cares about the issues in this case and was able to say to his department head at the Department of Ecology, I want climate change included in your evaluation. So when their documents come out, and these documents, they're thousands of pages, there will be an evaluation by the state of Washington on the impact of burning Powder River Basin coal or North Dakota oil in Asia.
It's not for transportation,
and other parts of the world. And the oil situation is a little more complex because technically we don't export oil since the Arab oil embargo and so on. But there's a serious move in Congress to remove that, and a lot of people think that this Port of Vancouver proposal is to be ready to ship massive amounts of oil to Asia. And we do have oil going through Oregon now on these oil trains that we're seeing all the time now, going up to Klatskanai. Is that how we say that? I'm newish to the state, so and being shipped from there, and it's so. There's a lot of this stuff moving around, and we have just a lot less power in Oregon to deal with it than they do in Washington or California.
I'm glad you mentioned the oil, because as I was driving into the program tonight, I heard an NPR discussion of the denial of the permit, but they said that was just one of many things that are going on, and they're actually some of the issues that are going on is they're kind of almost clearing the way for coal. And so
there's a program.
Wait a minute, I think it was for oil.
For oil, it's for oil. Yeah, there's a program called Connect Oregon, which is a transportation enhancement program managed by the State Transportation Board, which is another one of these little boards. Right,
things.
exactly. Where it's and these folks are appointed by the governor, but they don't report directly to him. Now, of course, there's influence. Of course, people have to work together, and a department head like Mary Abrams at the Department of State Lands, I mean, she reports to a 3-person board the governor, and 2 people who want to be governor. She reports to the governor, the treasurer, and the secretary of state. Those 3 together make up the state land board, and that's who hires her. But they don't make the decision on something like this coal application at the Port of Morrow. She did, under state law. Nonetheless, the fact that one of her bosses, the governor, had come out very strongly against coal in April.
It gave her some cover.
Exactly, exactly. Now, there wasn't any undue influence in writing. I mean, the Oregonian investigated that and looked at all the emails between Kitzhaber's office and the Department of State Lands and Mary Abrams personally, and found nothing untoward. But there was press coverage when Kitzhaber came out against coal. She knew that had happened. I mean, it makes a difference. So at this point, though, we then have this mixed bag of stuff going on. So there were 3 permits, not permits, subsidies in front of the State Transportation Board under this Connect Oregon program. And this is breaking news. I mean, this just happened today. Out of 37 projects, 3 of these were intended to support fossil fuels projects, which has led to a lot of stress and discontent from the environmental community and others who would like to have a livable...
Out of 37, 10 were?
No, just 3.
Oh, okay.
So 2 of them were oil, 1 was coal. And the coal one was for this Ambre energy project. And it was, I think, a $3 million subsidy by the state that was going to be matched by 2.3 by Ambre, which... I mean, it's ridiculous to be subsidizing fossil fuel companies on any level. I mean, it's a head slapper.
We do it to Exxon.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they are the most profitable industry overall in the history of globalized corporate capitalism. I mean, these are not mom and pop shops.
And we're giving them subsidies.
And we're giving them subsidies. And so the 2, and that vote, so even after this major permit had been denied by the Department of State Lands, the Transportation Board voted only 3-2 against providing a subsidy to Ambre for a project that is probably dead. It's like, what? So, and then they voted unanimously in favor of 2 oil subsidy projects. One is a grade separation in the town of Rainier and closure of some railroad crossing points to allow oil trains to move more quickly through the town of Rainier with less risk to people who are trying to cross the tracks, except that some of them will have to go farther now to find a safe crossing. I mean, some of the current crossings would be closed as part of this. And the other one is to improve the Port of St. Helens so that it can take more oil tankers. And so $5 million in state subsidy, $4.9 million in state subsidy was approved today by the Oregon State Transportation Board to support a company called Global Partners LP, Global Partners Limited Partnership. And what they did in Clatskanie is they bought an ethanol production plant and they applied to the Department of Environmental Quality for the ability to ship a little tiny bit of oil out of that facility to stop ethanol production, to use it as an oil shipment facility.
Is it a foot in the door thing?
And they dramatically increased the amount of oil that they were shipping through that. Eventually somebody noticed, I don't know how this happened, I'm sure there are people who do, but wouldn't be surprised if somebody who was watching oil trains going past their door
counted them
at some point called and said, hey, where are these people going and what's going on with this? At some point DEQ noticed that Global Partners LP was in massive violation of state requirements for permits for what they were doing. And they fined Global Partners LP $117,000. Now that's a lot of money to you and me.
It's nothing. Yeah.
Global Partners has a market capitalization of more than $1 billion, and over the past year their net profit was $500 million. So to pay a $117,000 fine, they did not have to call a special board meeting.
That's the
This
definition of chump change.
and part of that, under very limited, very weak state law, was a fine for the economic value that the company got out of violating state law. And that fine, assessed by the Department of Environmental Quality, was less than $300. It was 292, 272. I mean, one of those two I don't remember. But absurd. I mean, these folks are shipping tens of millions of dollars of oil through Oregon. They broke the law, no criminal charges, simply an administrative fine that's chump change to them. And they just got $5 million of subsidy from our state government to make it easier to keep on doing this. I mean, what they are calling special board meetings for is to say, hey, these patsies in Oregon that we're manipulating and fooling with, how can we get more projects going there? We don't want to be in Washington or California where they have a tougher attitude. You know, Oregon's the weak sibling on the West Coast. So on the one hand, we have this courageous and smart and well-crafted decision by the new director of the Department of State Lands, and with support from at least one of her three bosses, and with a lot of work by the staff. On the other hand, we have ongoing subsidy for fossil fuel companies, and the Department of Environmental Quality also just issued a new air permit to global partners for this oil export that they're continuing. And the oil train process is highly dangerous. I mean, Lake Magantic in Quebec, where they had the massive explosion that took out the entire downtown and killed several dozen people. An even bigger explosion in North Dakota, but fortunately it was right outside of town. I mean, they had to shut down the town and evacuate it and close off that area for quite a while. Took a long time to put out the fire, but and then as a result of this stuff, the federal regulatory process on train safety has belatedly come in and said, oh, we are moving a lot of flammable oil around. Maybe we should look at that more closely, and let's require safer train cars in a year or two.
I read or heard something about that's something that's going on, is that they're doing some reviews, and it just seems to me if they're doing that, they're planning to maybe down the road we're going to have these oil trains.
Absolutely. Now I mean, the key problem, of course, is that we're looking at these things inside a really narrow box of this is just a normal part of the economy. We're trying to apply limited regulatory procedures. We want to, our core responsibility is to support people in industry and commerce who are trying to enhance our gross domestic product by making things happen. Of course, putting out an oil train fire adds quite a bit to your gross domestic product for a little period of time right there. I mean, you have to spend a lot of money to do that, and that shows up. But a good example of the difference between the way these things are looked at in different parts of the world, GMOs and toxic chemicals. You know, in Europe, the requirement under the European Union regulations, the requirement is that a chemical be proven mostly safe-ish, you know, at least not ready to kill you on day one, before it can be used. So they don't have any BPA in baby bottles in Europe, because it's known that that is not a safe chemical.
Sure.
In the United States, a chemical has to be proven dangerous before it can be excluded. And so a very tiny number of chemicals have actually been excluded from the overall economy. And the same thing with GMOs. Europe does not, Europe has a mixed regime on genetically modified organisms, genetically engineered.
Japan and a few other.
But they have, I mean, some countries are banning them, some countries are requiring labeling. You know, Oregon with Measure 92 will have a chance to be the first state after Vermont to, which just did it through the state legislature, to Absolutely, and they knew they would.
Yeah,
They knew they would get sued. I mean, but they went into it eyes open and with some courage. Some politicians and elected
what
officials
it takes.
doing exactly, and it's up to us, of course, as the people, to hold their feet to the warmth, to hold their feet to the global warming, and make sure that they understand what their responsibilities are. Both leadership and representation are required from these elected officials.
Right. You know, you've mentioned the subsidies. We should say that, you know, those subsidies means people's taxes, right?
That's right.
And then when there's an accident and there's a cleanup, a lot of that falls on the local people, the local areas.
Absolutely.
And so a lot of this, you know, the people who are paying the taxes and the people that are having to pay for the cleanup, you know, through their taxes, for the subsidies and all, they're not getting anything out of this.
Well, and
Most of the money's going up top.
And the externalities, which is the economic phrase for the things that happen outside of that narrow box. So coal does not pay for asthma, even though coal combustion and the output of it contributes to it dramatically. Now, the Chinese are learning that the hard way right now, but it's happening all the time in the United States and many other parts of the world as well. Coal does not pay for mercury in tuna fish, but it causes it. The burning of coal puts mercury into the atmosphere that then goes into the food chain, and 1,000 other things. I mean, there are a whole series of
mainly,
these.
I think.
Well, but there's a lot of different stuff. I mean, so liquefied natural gas, these massive export terminals for fracked gas out of the Rockies and Western Canada that are proposed to come through the two corners of Oregon. The guy who is running the project in the northwest corner of Oregon, where the terminal would be built in Astoria, Warrenton, and based on pipelines coming down from Canada and on across underneath the Columbia River for a mile. What could possibly go wrong with that?
Nothing at all.
And then across Columbia and Clatsop counties. So when he does presentations, he talks about this beautiful facility that have massive industrial plant, 2 20-story liquefaction towers for the gas that would come in and then be compressed and liquefied down to minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit, so it can be reduced to 1/600th of its normal volume, and thereby be put onto these massive tankers and shipped across the Pacific for sale there. And he goes through the map and he says, and here's where we would process the mercury that we take out of the gas. And people look at each other, mercury in natural gas, and I'm burning that in my kitchen. Well, there's a misunderstanding there. That's wellhead gas before it's refined. It's not the pure methane that you burn in your kitchen. So wellhead gas has butane, it has propane, it has ethanes, it has radon, it has mercury, it can have other heavy metals. And in Colorado now, where fracking is running in 50,000 wells, the Front Range from Denver up through Fort Collins and Greeley has a permanent new haze, in addition to the longtime brown cloud that Denver has suffered from just particulates, but a permanent new haze from escaped emissions, air pollution emissions from these fracking wells that include all of this different stuff. And you do not want to be breathing butane. You do not want to be breathing propane. Not a good idea.
No. Well, the air must look a little bit like Beijing did before the Olympics.
You can see it. I mean, you can see it. It's not on the Chinese level, and that's mostly coal. But
right.
And the lack of even any minimal scrubbers and so on.
Right.
But
like you say, the Chinese are learning, though.
And
actually, they're on the cutting edge of photovoltaic cells and a lot of these other things.
5 of the 6 biggest companies in the world producing photovoltaic cells are Chinese.
And are any of them American?
No, I think the 6th one is German, although we have their headquarters here, their American headquarters in the big plant in Hillsboro, and that's Solar World. So,
which
is a good organization. I mean, they do very high quality products.
I mean, to people, I can't expect the corporate news, since they have, commercials and all these things. They have to cover all the child molesters and all the accidents and all that. So they don't really get into a lot of the weeds of the stuff that we're talking about, which is, a
Right.
good reason
Right.
why we're doing this. But, to watch any of that stuff on TV or listen to even NPR, what I heard was just a couple of minute clip.
Right.
And it's just so complicated, and there's so much going on here, as I learned when you talked about LNG when you were here last. So I really appreciate you being able to come on and talk about some of these. There's a lot of information out there on the internet. You want to go to Power Pass Coal or Beyond Coal, go to the Oregon Sierra Club, Rising Tide, Portland Rising Tide. These all have links to some of the stuff that we're talking about. And you also had a book that you brought.
Oh, I did.
That I think we should bring up, because if folks want to do some reading and do some research.
Yeah, let me be a shill for the Sierra Club here a little bit.
All right.
So our national executive director is this great guy, Mike Brune.
Here we go.
Okay, yeah. So he wrote this originally in 2008. This is the 2010 edition, right after he became executive director for Sierra Club, and it's a really nice way to get a good handle. So Coming Clean is the title, Breaking America's Addiction to Oil and Coal, and that's the primary focus. A little bit about gas in it.
Well, what I like about it is it talks about all three of them and shows probably the connection between a lot of the push by these various companies, which in some ways are just one company, because they all have the same ideas of what they want to do.
It is one industry, and it has two key defects. And that's where we have to break out of this box of treating the fossil fuels companies just like somebody who's trying to get a building permit to convert a small building into a restaurant or something. It's just not the same animal at all. So first, remember the Great Recession starting in 2008?
Yeah.
I suspect you do. We're all still living with the results.
Mm-hmm.
That was the subprime mortgage bubble. Bank of America just got
I couldn't believe how big that was.
a slight, well, it's the story in the New York Times today that the 17 billion actually, with some offsets that they get to take and so on, is actually going to turn into about 12 billion. I mean, dropping it by about a third. So it's, a little less there than meets the eye, and it's still a very small percentage of their overall net worth, right?
Course.
It's not like, if your landlord rips you off on your rent deposit, they're subject to treble damages, 300% of that rent deposit. Wouldn't it be nice if corporate polluters had to pay 300% of the damages they caused?
Sure, and the taxpayers didn't have to pick up the rest of it.
But the fossil fuels companies are a much, much bigger bubble than the subprime mortgage bubble.
It just hasn't busted yet.
It hasn't busted yet because about half of their value is based on what they do over the course of a year in terms of their stock value. About half of it, though, is based on the concept of proven reserves. Oil and gas and coal and other extreme energy, oil shale, tar sands in Canada, the dirtiest fossil fuel on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
About half of their stock value is based on these proven reserves. And the fact of the matter is that 80% of the fossil fuels on the planet have to be left in the ground for us to have a livable climate going forward. And I dressed up for you today. I know it's a little bit hard to tell. I mean, normally I wear sackcloth and ashes out of the guilt I feel over what our generation is doing to the up and coming generations. But I wore my dad's old bolo here.
He's moving in on it, right?
Okay, there we go.
Hey, pretty good camera work there.
Nice. So this is the same bolo I wore in his honor when I was arrested the first time at the White House in protest of the Keystone XL pipeline in 2011, and because I think he would have been proud. He was an open-minded MD and a lover of science, of intelligent science, and he died youngish. He died at 70, which is spitting distance for you and me at this point in our lives.
Yeah, yeah.
But I have a 96-year-old father-in-law, and I have a 4-month-old granddaughter. And if my granddaughter lives to my father-in-law's age, she will see 2110. That's the new calendar math. When we talk about global catastrophe by the turn of the century, or by 2050, or by 2030, and that's the real window that we have to make massive changes in the way our economy is structured, in the way that we exploit the resources of the planet, and to make the conversion to clean, renewable, sustainable energy, and a sustainable culture, and locavore food, away from the fossil fuels bubble that we're living within right now. I mean, that's the period of time, and that's the challenge, and that's what's going on in terms of how our species and all the other species are going to face this warming planet as it goes hotter and hotter and hotter, which it will, even if we make this conversion. I mean, there's a lag time that is significant.
Right, and not only that, but there are people that are already facing it. You know, people that are bearing the brunt of some of these stronger hurricanes, stronger floods. There's islands at the high points of just a few feet high. They're slowly, they're not going to have an island in a lot less time than 2000 or 2100. So there's things going on now that it's going to affect people, and like I say, we just allow the corporate feudalism, as I call it, that's going on now, and their lackeys in Congress to keep digging, and it just seems to me that what you're saying is very, very clear and very well put, but it really gets down to the fact that we keep doing the wrong things, and the people allow it to happen.
Sir, put down the shovel and step away from the hole.
That's right.
I mean, this is a really serious challenge to us, and the Pacific to the planet, and the Pacific. So the director of the United Nations climate program, Cristina Figueres, said a few months ago, every country, large and small, every sector of society, every city and town has to do its part, or we will not be able to reverse the trajectory of global warming. And there's many values to that. I mean, first there's the direct value of mitigation, of reducing the impact of the carbon output and the carbon equivalent output, like methane, which is a much more dangerous gas, global warming gas, than carbon dioxide. But then there's also the example value of that mitigation to other people. Because if we're doing something better, we actually do have the right to get a little bit snotty toward our neighbors and say, hey, come on, clean up your act here. You know, we've worked hard to clean up ours, and we're paying a price for that. The price turns out to be one hell of a lot less than the price we're paying in two other ways. I mean, there's three aspects to climate change and dealing with it: mitigation, adaptation, and suffering. And all three things are going on. You mentioned the islands that are just going to go away. I mean, that's going to happen. I mean, we know.
I think no matter what we do.
No matter what we do. No, I mean, global sea level by the turn of the century, when my granddaughter might be 84 years old, 86 years old, global sea level is going to be something like 4 to 6 feet higher than it is now. I mean, that's and we're past the point of being able to stop that. It's just a question of how much more, and it could be substantially more than that. We don't know, because what we do now and between now and then has a big impact. And there are also some tipping point issues that are just starting to be understood. But the adaptation question, and my favorite example, and we're going to see it here, we're already seeing it here in some ways, the state of Vermont, Hurricane Irene, actually in the middle of the Keystone XL arrests at the White House in 2011, was a Category 1 hurricane, which means the winds weren't very fast, but it was massive, and held huge amounts of water because there's so much more moisture in the atmosphere because of the Arctic melting. And so this was late August of 2011, and it just rolled up the East Coast. Connecticut, we're not talking about the global south here. Connecticut was without power for 11 days as a result of it. It's hard to keep your ice cream frozen.
Yeah, Ben and Jerry's were pissed.
And they were also pissed because in Vermont, they had the most massive flooding since white people invaded that part of the world. And they lost almost all of their covered bridges, their signature architectural transportation thing. Now they've been rebuilding them and investing a huge amount of money to do it, but they're having to adapt. So it's not the same covered bridge. If it were, it would just be stupid, because there's going to be another flood. And so they're going up the slopes. They're making them longer and higher. And there are engineers who are working hard to make that sensible. They're saying, okay, we think the maximum feasible flood now is 50% larger or 100% larger or 200% larger than what we used to think it would be. And so we have to be ready to deal with that. And that's adaptation. And that's really costly. And suffering, of course, is the most costly of all. You know, Bill McKibben, founder of 350.org, which is another terrific group.
I forgot to mention that one. 350.org is a huge, important one.
One of the things that he points out for us here in the Pacific Northwest is that to some degree, not totally, but to some degree, geography is destiny. For example, if we can stop these coal exports on these 2.5 remaining projects, the 2 in Washington and the half of one teetering after the DSL
Ambre,
decision. Right, exactly, in Oregon. I mean, you can ship, it's about 1,100 miles from the Powder River Basin to the coast of the Pacific Northwest. And it's only 30% longer than that to take it to Houston. They could do that. And in fact, we export 100 million tons of coal a year now from the United States, mostly to Europe. And that's about 10% of our total annual production, the rest of it going to electricity, right? The other 900 million tons. But to get it from Houston to Asia, a lot more expensive than it is to get it from the Pacific Northwest to Asia. So got to go through the Panama Canal, even though the new canal is supposed to be done this year. You know, can take these big super tankers. Still, it's a lot farther. Costs a lot more money. So the buyers in Asia are starting to look at that point, well, what makes sense for us financially, as well as some of them caring about other things, like you know, potentially having a revolution because people can't breathe the air. I mean, the Chinese government, you know, communist capitalism is quite concerned about not having their new middle class decide to take up arms against a sea of outrages.
And you're dealing with 1 billion people. But
exactly.
Billion. Right. What do you do against 1 billion pissed off people?
Yeah, it gets tricky. So so McKibben's point that geography is destiny is really key for us here. I mean, if we can stop these coal export plans, if we can turn back this insane, illegitimate, illegal, greedy oil export process that's going on through Oregon now and prevent the one through the Port of Vancouver that's planned, if we can stop these 2 LNG export terminals and the pipelines necessary to feed them coming from Western Canada and throughout the Rockies with this fracked gas, which is doing such devastating things to those communities, that makes a real difference. I mean, we are on the front lines of climate change and the climate fight and the climate crisis.
And and that's important to figure on stopping them, but even to stall them as long as we can.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the longer you stall them, they might run out of money, which has happened over at Bradford or whatever that was called. And also the fact that heaven forbid, but it's going to happen. We're going to have more hurricanes. We're going to have more natural disasters. Of course, they're not going to say this happened because of global warming, that happened because of global warming. They will never say that. But the fact that you have this pattern emerging at the same time, that's going to, you know, people are going to, you know, as dumbed down as people are and as lacking in critical thought, because that's how they're trained in school, it's going to come through. So the longer we can slow this process down, I think the better
Absolutely.
chance we have of the public perceptions and the public opinion doing what we're talking about needs to be done.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And I mean, delay is on our side in terms of making it worse. I mean, first, do no more harm is the principle that we need to apply to this. A variation on the Hippocratic Oath. Don't make it worse. I mean, the problem with fossil fuels is we all use them every day. So there's a clear contradiction there. I think it's very hard for us to get our heads around it. And
We're using it right now, probably.
absolutely, we are.
The
I mean,
coal-fired electricity.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if this is PGE or Pacificor here, but either way, you know, there's a lot of coal that's gone into making the electricity that we're using right now. But first, do no more harm. Any new project should be completely renewables. Any new energy project. Plus, and we talked about this before, plus efficiency and conservation, which are not the same. They overlap. You know, efficiency is new LED light bulbs. Conservation is turning them off when you don't need them. Now, the industry doesn't like to talk about conservation because they don't like anybody to think that there could be a use of energy in our gross domestic product based economy that is an illegitimate use of energy, that we should be able to choose whether something makes sense. I mean, my personal favorite is lights on when the building is closed and nobody can go in, including especially advertising signage. Now, I understand that's their human right to have people know that there's a business there that could like to tell us that it's going to be available at a different time, because after all, corporations are people too, my friend.
That's right. That's right.
So, in fact, I
Nice
saw a corporation praying at church the other day. It's not often.
Hobby Lobby?
It wasn't that one, is another one, but you know, since corporations actually do have religion now, and it's not polite, you know, to listen to what other people are praying for at church. But I couldn't resist, so I snuck up, you know, next to this corporation and you know, got on my knees and at the altar with it, and eavesdropped. And the corporation had quite a lament. It was a little bit of like the book of Job, and it was saying, you know, dear Lord, I just want to sell boils and plagues and locusts and make profit for my shareholders on those things, and yet I am beleaguered on all sides by people who don't want boils and plagues and locusts. And Lord, please deliver this tiny corporation, your servant, Lord, from these people who are not willing to give me my rights as your servant to do whatever the bloody hell I want with your planet.
And with our planet, that's the bottom line. It is not their planet; it is our planet. You know, we got 5 minutes left. We were going to go into some footage of the Ferguson rally here in town, and I'm glad you had the extra time, because we covered a small part of what could be talked about.
Well, and I do hope, you know, I do hope you'll get back to Ferguson with your next show.
Well, definitely. And I've already got the rally done, and it's going to be turned in and played.
Excellent.
And that'll work out. So, because that's an important issue too. But
yeah, if we don't have human rights in this country, we won't be able to solve any of these problems.
That's true. People got to be able to be heard. But you know, we've got a little less than 5 minutes left, and I got a question for you. You seem really well versed in this, and it just seems to me that the oil and gas and all them and the energy corporations, they got all this money. They could be putting a lot more money into research. They could be making just as much money with sustainable fuels as they are right now. Why don't they do that?
It's the stock price problem that I alluded to earlier. So no corporate chieftain under our economic model can survive by saying, my stock price is 50% above where it needs to be. Just the opposite. And in fact, there's on the fracking, the smaller companies are not tiny by any means. And in fact, ExxonMobil is the largest. But you know, on some of these smaller fracking companies, they are using just the opposite approach. and are of course thrilled with it, which is their executives get massive stock options. All of their executives and all these companies get massive stock
massive
options.
bonuses.
And massive bonuses. But a stock that starts at 50 cents a share, they get options at that, and they frack a few wells, and all of a sudden their stock is at $20 a share, and they can sell off a couple million shares and retire. And they don't care if it's a bubble they've created, because fracking, this whole myth of it lasting for 100 years, turns out to be just another part of the bubble. These wells are not going to last for 100 years. Some of them that are 8 and 10 years old, which is how long we've had this kind of fracking, these horizontal shale bed fracking for natural gas wells, are already playing out, and production is dropping dramatically. So there's, building up new infrastructure dependent on that means that we have to keep drilling new wells using millions and millions of gallons of water in each one and using it to extinction. It's permanently withdrawn. 5 million gallons per frac. A single well can be fracked as many as 2 or 3 dozen times because they're breaking up different sections of the shale rock around it and pulling out microscopic bits of natural gas and pulling it up. That water is permanently withdrawn from the hydrologic cycle. In areas that often are drought-stricken or semi-arid, like Texas and Colorado.
That's why Ed Schultz was turned against the Keystone, was because of
water.
Effect of water.
Water turns out to be actually a pretty important thing. The best line I ever heard was, turns out you can't make water out of plastic. So it is the single most important molecule.
And it's probably in some ways the most important part of what we're talking about here, even though we just touched on it just tangentially here at the end. Well, if we end up destroying our water, it ain't going to matter in some ways what happens with the climate.
I was talking to my long-suffering better half earlier today, and she's heard me pontificate about this stuff, I'm afraid, ad nauseum, but I said I've got a great idea for a new product. Bottled water, and calling it organic non-GMO water.
It would probably sell like crazy.
I think so.
It's all marketing and bottling.
But the reason these fossil fuels companies can't change their behavior is because they're caught in this antique economic paradigm of stock price being the be-all and end-all. They can't say we have to leave 80% of our proven reserves in the ground. What's happening, though, as the renewables conversion goes forward, here to some degree and in other parts of the world, there's a great piece
Got a minute left here.
Okay, and I touched on this on our July 11th talk. Al Gore in the June 18th issue of Rolling Stone talks about hope with renewables. So the two utilities in Germany, which is 37% renewable energy now, the two utilities still dependent on coal, have lost 56% of their market value. That's what's going to happen to the bubble here.
We're down to a little over 30 seconds. Thank you for coming on, Ted. You're always really clear, and you bring up a lot of ways of looking at these things that we need to look at. And I also want to thank the crew. They did a great job in there. They were probably had their finger on the button for the video, but it was pretty hard to pull away. When the iron is hot, you got to strike it. We clarified a lot of things in my mind. I hope the viewers were able to ingest some of this, and it'll be replaying a couple times. So hope you can catch it. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back in 2 weeks.